Thank you all for tuning in. The following is a presentation of Bald Spots Productions. Be sure to like, comment, and share. Subscribe, follow, whatever it is you've got to do to kick that algorithm into gear and help us reach more people.
Yes, it is I, your humble host, Bill Hatch, coming to you live from the Place Club City of the Best Spots Productions in the beautiful city of Malden, Missouri. Joining me, oh no, I am getting an echo. Joining me from more than acceptable safe social distances are my guests for today. From all the way in Vegas is Chris Walker. How you doing, Chris?
Doing great. Thanks for having me.
Joining us from the mystical land of Portugal is the man. Oh no, wait, not Portugal, the man. Sean Weisbrot. How you doing, Sean?
Yeah, I'm good. Cheers.
Okay. No, glad to have you both on. Of course, with this being a round table, I want to invite you to talk to each other, talk to me. We'll talk back and forth. We'll have a good time. That is, of course, the main point of doing this and getting everybody getting to know you in a slightly different way. But the first question I always ask everybody is, what are you reading? So we'll start with Sean. Sean, what are you reading?
I currently do not have a book that I'm reading, but I do spend a lot of time every day. Well, I spend a lot of time every day looking at what's happening around the world. So
Okay.
I'm focused more on geopolitics, and
Sure.
sometimes I get into macroeconomics and
Nice.
localized history, things like that, trying to understand how what's happening in the world may affect things that I'm interested in or things that I'm invested in. So no books, but
Right.
yeah.
Okay, no, that's cool. I love economics. It's a little hobby of mine that I'm not spending a lot of time with right now because I'm actually going to school in a concentration called Marketplace Ministry, which combines the usual classes of divinity with business and journalism and a bunch of other stuff. And I found it interesting, and so I decided to go for it. But yeah, geopolitics. So tell me, in your opinion, are we headed to World War III yet?
Depends on how you look at it. I would like to think no.
Okay.
So I lived in China for 10 years, and I lived in Vietnam for 4, and now in Portugal for 1.
Oh, wow.
So I have a pretty keen understanding of the Chinese psyche. And I left because the current leader, Xi Jinping, made me and a lot of other people feel very uncomfortable living in China. So I know that China is smart enough to not attack the US, but China desperately wants Taiwan.
Yeah.
And the US desperately wants to protect Taiwan, mostly because Taiwan is the global semiconducting hub. So what the US is trying to do right now is build its own localized manufacturing, which will take years. It's 5 years and probably $50 to $100 billion of investment just to get it up and running. China is also trying to build its own inside the mainland, but the US is trying really hard to prevent it from doing so. So there's a conflict there. And then you've got Russia and Ukraine, you've got Israel versus Lebanon and Hamas inside Gaza and the West Bank, and Iran potentially. Iran has threatened Israel. So I think if Iran were to attack Israel, it would force the US to get involved. But right now, China's trying to draw the U.S. attention towards towards Southeast Asia, and Russia's drawing the U.S.'s attention and money into Ukraine, and Hamas and Iran are drawing the U.S.'s attention to Israel. Whether this is the beginning of a World War III, I'm not really capable of saying yet, but what I can see is that there's several large, powerful countries that are trying to spread the U.S. thin to test the U.S.'s ability to defend itself and its allies. Maybe that's for the purpose of seeing if they were to attack U.S. things that the U.S. values, whether they could properly defend them globally, maybe they can, maybe they can. I'm not really sure, but
Okay.
it's very obvious that the U.S. is putting a lot of money into aid in Taiwan, or not really Taiwan, but selling things to Taiwan, buying things from Taiwan, as well as providing aid to Israel and Ukraine.
Yeah.
And having the U.S. position its military assets in the Mediterranean near to Israel and in Taiwan is also making it very stretched. So not sure about World War III yet.
But we have quite the buffet of choices. We have quite the buffet before us, and we're trying to overeat. So
I think if Russia were emboldened to attack somewhere like Poland, you'd probably see World War III pretty fast because NATO would be forced to respond.
Right.
If Iran were to attack Israel, it would draw the U.S. in, which would probably escalate pretty fast. And if China attacked Taiwan and the U.S. didn't have the semiconductor fabs ready, it would probably force the U.S.'s hand there as well. So anything is possible, but we're not there yet.
Not quite. Not to the tipping point. So, okay.
No, but it's every day is more dangerous.
Everybody? Yeah, that's for sure. But, okay. And then you, is your main thing your podcast, or is there something else you're working on right now?
So I have a consulting service. I'm helping companies that are grossing at least $5 million a year to optimize their costs, because a lot of companies severely mismanage their finances. And so, there's a lot of companies looking to sell, or they're looking to stay relevant, or they're looking to invest in new growth. And so now's a really great time when the markets look pretty shaky. So I do that, and I also angel invest in other service agencies and consulting firms that can launch their products or their service quickly and not need additional revenue. So they're not going to be $1 billion company. They're not going to go public. They may never even get acquired by somebody else, but they can provide significant dividends in the long term.
Cool. Okay. That would definitely keep you busy. Okay. Chris, who are you reading?
Yeah. So actually, I'm taking a break from reading right now, as I'm actually in a writing stage. I'm actually working on 2 more books, which normally I try to do them one at a time, but I've got 2 different projects that came up kind of in the same light. So working on them back and forth a little bit is definitely interesting for me. Certainly turning to it's putting a big strain on my time management, trying to make sure I can actually give everything the attention it needs. But I would say that if actually as I do that, it's most of the reading I'm doing has to do with research and studying in light of those projects. So one book is actually the continuation of the first book I ever wrote. I'm actually writing the sequel to that finally, and deciding on whether or not I'm going to actually conclude it or keep it open for more, because there is still potentially more to the story. And then the second one is actually a little bit more direct, but what I'm doing with this one is kind of taking my a little bit more military intelligence background approach towards the topic of eschatology, which has certainly been a huge topic for a lot of people lately with things spurning up in the Middle East. So, and actually, just want to actually give a compliment to Sean, because I do think that your assessment of a lot of the geopolitical breakdown was very accurate. So, even as a guy who worked in the intelligence community, you're pretty spot on for most of that. Most of the stuff is just a chess game. Believe it or not, most big countries don't actually want wars. We know that it's incredibly costly. It's very difficult to manage. Once it gets to an actual war, it becomes very hard to control it. So usually what we're trying to do is maintain the objectives and push the agendas without it having to escalate to that level. And that's why it's kind of a tap dance between the different parties, because nobody really wants to commit to what actual warfare costs on all sides, especially since when you talk about World War III, it wouldn't be hard to see that the battle lines would be basically NATO and the United States between most of the most of the Eastern countries and a lot of the stuff out of Asia. with Africa, ironically, being probably where a good portion of the more in clandestine operations taking place, because there's some real assets in Africa that everybody's trying to gain a hold of. So it's interesting, but it's like this big chess game that everybody's trying to put everybody into checkmate without losing their pieces. And once you commit to a war, it's really hard to not lose all your pieces. You're going to be committing everything. So
Yeah.
I think your breakdown was very well stated. So I would agree, actually, context of World War III, it's not outside the realm of feasibility that it could escalate to that, but there are going to be checks and balances that people are going to be trying to take to decide whether or not they're going to escalate that far, and the cost is going to have to be pretty heavy for someone to finally push it that hard.
Yeah, you were military intelligence, weren't you?
Yeah, I was an intelligence agent for the Army for quite some time. I joined in 2000, and by the time I got done, I had served in, I don't even know, probably more than 20 countries.
Wow.
I've seen operations on 3 continents. And what's funny is I don't speak a lick of any language other than English. So, but
yeah,
you do get to, when you do get to live among a population and you get to kind of see how they live just as a culture, it does speak a lot to their mindset and to their goals and their objectives. And truth is, most people really aren't trying to push for a huge full-scale war, but there are definitely opposing forces that people are not happy with. China and America on the economic stages are probably still the 2 biggest pushes against each other. And Russia, the whole thing with Ukraine was really quite simple. I know a lot of people were trying to figure out it was, but as Ukraine was getting ready to become part of NATO, Russia was never going to let a NATO country on their border. It's really that simple.
Yeah, it looks like Russia might have bit off more than they can chew. They're definitely having troubles
and that's
getting what they want out of it.
Unfortunately, it's kind of the lesson of the 20th century when people are trying to, even anything after World War II. Korea was something that had no real ending to it. Vietnam was a war that was supposed to be quick and easy, and it turned into, one of the longest wars America's ever fought, as well as the Vietnam people have been fighting. We were just one of many people that they had been fighting in a long chain of issues, and that still stems from World War II. And then as you go into a lot of the smaller conflicts, I mean, the point is warfare's changed from what most people still consider warfare to be, in like the terms of what we used to, everybody would fight until there was a treaty signed, and then everybody would just go their own separate ways, and things all changed for whatever the new course is. That's not how it works anymore. Once you commit to something, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to change anything, other than you're going to be committing a lot and hoping that you can at least push the needle in the direction you want and then still maintain it even when you pull the troops out, which is, we've seen it ourselves. It's not how it works anymore.
You were going to say something, Sean?
I was going to say, I think Russia was not expecting the level of support that Ukraine would receive from the global community. And I think he underestimated Zelensky's ability as an orator.
I'd agree with both of those.
And I think if the previous administration, before Zelensky, were still in charge, Ukraine would have probably fallen very fast.
Interesting.
I'm not sure. That one, I'm not sure. It's hard to say how. That's one of the things that it's always weird when it comes to the leadership of who's in charge of certain things and the decisions they make. I've learned that you just trying to anticipate who's going to make what choices is actually kind of a fool's errand. You'll never really know what someone's going to do with a decision until they're forced with it. So there's no way of really knowing how the previous administration would have handled it. I do think that the previous administration being a little bit more aggressive on their foreign policies probably would have, I think what more than likely what happened was Russia chose to stay off until they saw an administration that was going to be a little bit more even keeled. And I don't think they were actually expecting the response that we did give. So I do agree with Sean on that. I don't think that they were expecting as much support as came as quickly as it did.
Well, it's interesting that you bring up oration. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Sean.
I was going to say, you had also mentioned that you've been to 20 plus countries and don't speak any other languages. It's quite interesting for me that you didn't have that kind of instruction. Now, I have one of my cousins works for the Department of State, and he's been working there for probably 20 years at least now. and he's been trained in Arabic and Spanish and
Right.
a few other languages, so that he would have, let's say, 2 or 3 years in country, and then he'd go back to DC for a few years, and then so he'd go in and out, just so that they would. I guess the goal is to make sure you don't feel like any one given country becomes your home, and your loyalties may shift, by accident.
Well, and that's
but
just
also
really more
for in-house training.
Yeah, to answer, I guess, the insinuated question, it's really more because of the nature of my work was very designed towards targets as opposed to culture. So my job, as I would transfer in and out of different countries, I would usually end up tracing the intelligence and following where it leads, and that's where you'd be bouncing around sometimes. And so people like, I think you said your brother or your brother-in-law.
My cousin.
Your cousin, I'm sorry. So, but yeah, people like that who actually spend that time in there because they have that kind of knowledge base and that kind of ability to communicate a little bit more is usually that's why they're the first people I would be linking up with when I would get sent in, because they would be kind of the safety net.
So he was actually tasked with like protecting the ambassadors and the presidents. So he was one of the ones that carried the gun and would protect them. And he protect. I think he protected Condoleezza Rice. He's protected Hillary Clinton, Bill Clinton when they were outside of the U.S. on visits to different countries.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
So,
But yeah, I was thinking it's interesting that you mentioned Zelensky's ability to orate being a part of what's going on over there. And just a quick glance over history, the top of mind. It seems that a lot of countries, their ability to fight has to do with their leaders' ability to speak well. We look back and World War II, obviously a battle of the orators. You got Hitler's ability to speak well and drum up his people's support. Churchill and Roosevelt both being skilled orators and being able to drum up their support. And even going back as far as the American Civil War and Lincoln's ability to orate. Am I just missing something, or could it be that that a leader's ability to speak has a very vital role in a country's ability to sustain war?
Go ahead, Sean. I want to hear your take.
Well, I was going to break it down into two parts. One is their ability to collect their thoughts, put them together, and express them in a way that people can become emotionally charged. The other is the emotional empathy to be able to understand if their people are willing to tolerate war at that given point in time. And when you have a country that's being attacked by another country, like Ukraine was, their backs are against the wall. The citizens of Ukraine will die to protect their country, right? Anytime a country is attacked, their people will throw their lives away to stop the invasion. And Vietnam is a fantastic example of this. As you had mentioned, it was a very prolonged war. In my mind, it should have never happened, but that's a different story. And at the time, you didn't really have, I don't think for the Vietnam War, you had a very good leader who was able to motivate the people because there were so many people that were anti-war. And maybe it was because he wasn't a good leader or he wasn't a good orator, right? And I think a lot of people were like, why are we even there? What are we doing there? Right? But when you look at Zelensky, he's like, I'm going to be assassinated if I don't say something, right? If I don't get my people to fight, if I don't go to the UN, if I don't go to the US Congress and convince people why they need to support us. So Zelensky has this incredible ability to understand the needs of his people and the needs of his country and other people's desire to not see Putin get his way. And so I think he's very capable, and therefore he's been able to get support for a long period of time in order to keep his country going.
I would have to agree. I think with Zelensky, the biggest ally that he had was in his initial messages. As the war broke out and they started trying to defend themselves, they didn't call for aid in terms of we need NATO to send troops, we need U.S. soldiers, we need the British Air Force here. But they didn't say any of that. They were very smart about what they said. They said, if you provide the money and the weapons, we'll provide the soldiers. That's exactly what most allying countries would actually want to hear, because they don't mind aiding a cause, but what they don't want to do is commit their sons and daughters to it.
Yeah.
And that was exactly his message. I think he was very well, I think it was actually very calculated and very well executed, that basically all he was saying was, if you can give us the means to fight them, we will. And in the process of doing that, what it showed was their willingness to take on the big dog, which, of course, in America, we love the underdog story. So just he kind of knew the psychology of who he was talking to before he opened his mouth. So I got to give him a lot of props. He did a very good job about knowing what message was going to stick, how to deliver it. He himself barely delivered it internationally anyway. He purposely chose to let his ambassadors and his representatives carry those messages to the people who've been already working and building those relationships. He used his cards very well. So I do have to say that he played correctly in that context. And I think where Putin really had this problem, especially in the early stages, was they were unable to truly villainize their enemy as the Ukrainians are as bad guys, which made it very difficult for even people in Russia to say, why are we fighting this? We get that there's probably some political gain here, but as far as is it worth risking my sons or my daughters, there was hesitation in the initial stages. And they've had to kind of work hard internally with their own public relations to kind of make that statement now that we do need to win this war and it's something that we need to fight. But they've had to ramp that up. And if they had been able to accomplish that beforehand, their soldiers might have been more motivated about winning it in the initial stages, which means they wouldn't have had time to prolong it. So, I mean, but again, this as we nitpick it apart, it's really difficult. But the only thing I'm trying to use as an example here is that I do think, to your point, being able to narrate the story, being able to tell the message correctly does play a huge factor. It's the same reason why, since we used the Vietnam War as an example, that's a good example there. As it started, there was an initial probably about 50-50 split, whether or not it was a good idea, but that was enough to get things rolling. And as it started ramping up, people initially started trying to be supportive of it, but the longer it took, the more the support drew away. And what you'll see during that same time period is you'll see a lot of leadership changes, because we're a country that, our president's only going to be in office for 4 years at a time, when we think about that 4-year segment, we would think that it's just, okay, 4 years this, and then if he gets reelected, it's another 4 years. But the reality is most presidents won't make bold decisions and kind of risky decisions, even if they're necessary, until their second term in office, because they don't want to risk making a large groundbreaking maneuver in the first season because they want to try for that reelection. So it's interesting to see how our own system can actually create these windows of opportunity for people on the other side if there is, in fact, a gap in our leadership for being decisive. And again, I can argue all sides of that argument. I'm just trying to statement of what it is. It does exist. And the other people who are, across the pond, they know these and they can play it out. So that's why American elections are such a huge thing. We're probably the only country in the world that almost the entire world pays attention to how our elections go. Most people couldn't care less about most other countries' internal elections. So it's interesting to see that dynamic of it.
I like to pay attention to the elections of other countries just because I'm curious to see how they're moving. So, for example, I do genealogy for my family, and I've been doing it for about 15 years. And finally got proof that my father's grandfather, my great-grandfather, was born in Poland. And several of his siblings were born in Poland, and his parents were born in Poland, and they had several siblings, and so my family was in Poland for a while. And so I started to become interested in Poland in the last few weeks because of that, obviously. Before that, my entire life, I was told we were German. I spent years learning German. I studied abroad in Austria with the host family for a summer. Like, I was very heavily interested in Germany, and I watched the German elections when I was younger and all of that. All of it was nothing because my family's not even German, but that's a different discussion. So I've been watching Poland now, and Poland actually just had an election about 10 days ago. And what was really interesting was that they had this kind of like far-right faction that was in charge, and they lost. And even though it's a coalition government, as a lot of European countries are, I feel like they're taking Poland in a good direction. I think a lot of people have been concerned for the last 8 years that they were not doing something that was good for the country. So I'm quite interested in that because Poland was very instrumental in protecting Ukrainians. But Poland is also really deeply concerned about Russia invading, or Belarus, who's now holding Russian nukes. And to my knowledge, some of the Wagner group that remains is still in Belarus as well. So Poland's scared because Poland was basically swallowed up by Germany and Russia several times in history, and they just want to stay alive. They want to, it's one of the only countries that's been swallowed up and then regained independence, and then swallowed up and regained independence, and through these hundreds of years maintained their culture despite having oppressors. It's really fascinating to see how strong their will is to kind of be independent. So they're putting a lot of a lot of resources into building their military. The UN, I think, requires 2% of the GDP be put towards defense, and I think they're on track to hit 4%, which is even more, I believe, than the US.
Wow.
So they're putting a lot of energy, a lot of resources into buying military weapons from the US and I believe South Korea. And they're trying to multiply the size of their standing army, but they're also heavily investing in tourism and high technology, and building out aviation manufacturing, and then trying to get startups in there to build out their kind of secondary economy. So it's quite fascinating to see how Poland is responding to Russia and Putin's threat.
Well, I can kind of understand why the Poles wouldn't, why the Polish people wouldn't want to get taken over again. If I remember right, after World War II, didn't the entire country move like several hundred kilometers west?
I don't think it moved. I think Russia just engulfed it.
Well, the border, the official
Russia just said, yeah, you're mine.
The official borders did change quite significantly, if I remember right. But it's
From
definitely
what I understand, the USSR expanded its borders to be where Berlin was.
Right. And they definitely have had a lot of troubles over the years, and it seems like they may have learned their lessons about that. I can definitely see where that would be where the ability to speak there, to go back again to the thing, would be very important. We have a very weak speaker, in my opinion, right now here in the U.S. and so getting involved this would be the time to I think to do something to make that would make the U.S. want to move, because we don't have somebody, I think, that the majority of the country would get behind, as far as if Biden said let's go to war, I don't think he could support it. I don't think he's got that strong of a speaking skill behind him to really get. I mean, maybe Ukraine, because like you said there, Chris, I think it was, we love the underdog story. But and Taiwan, because there were definitely reasons why we would want to get behind some of these countries, but I don't think that we could depend on Biden to speak us into it, to talk us into it.
Biden definitely doesn't have the energy, the personal, the physical, the mental energy to convince people to start a war.
Yeah.
And I don't think the American public has the stomach for war anymore after what they saw with the pullout of Afghanistan.
Yeah, that's for sure.
And the nonsensical wars that we've had for decades. I mean, most of those, most if not all of those, were completely useless and should have never happened, and got us to where we have this debt now. If we hadn't started those wars, the debt would not be where it is.
Right.
But that's besides the point. At the same time, I think we should be more concerned about a civil war than about the U.S. as a country going to war against another country.
See, I could see that.
I'm not sure. I don't know. I could see some of the merits in what he says. I don't know if I agree with all of it. But, I mean, obviously when September 11th happened, a response was going to be necessary. Where that response led to, I don't know if I think I agree that I don't know if it needed to go all the directions that it went. But I do think that when somebody puts that large of a direct attack against you, that it's got to be responded to in kind. But what that meant as far as then invading Iraq, I don't know. So there, we can definitely talk about that stuff for a long time. But I will say that I do believe that internally there's a lot more issues that the United States needs to resolve. More, I think, about those areas than they are right now trying to handle our foreign policies. Most of the time when we tend to flex, I guess, our military might, it usually gets perceived in one of two ways. One of them is whoever we flexed for is always very grateful, and whoever we flexed against and anyone who's friends with them immediately views us as the world bully. So it's interesting to, there's no way to run a country and not tick someone off, because unfortunately someone's going to be butting heads with somebody at all times. That's just the nature of humanity. But I do think that as far as our debt and a lot of the ways things have been run, so I would say that in terms of just the choices made by the leadership as far as where to put money, where to put assets, how long we're supposed to do certain things, and even dictating some of the objectives, I don't think that we've always made the right choices there. I would have to agree. But I do think that the people who made those choices, I do believe they made the best choice they thought was possible for what they had. I don't think I agree with their decisions, but that doesn't mean I don't disagree that they at least considered things before they made the decisions they did. And what's going to lead to, I think, a lot of these issues is going to be on the internal side. I don't think America is going to tear itself apart based off of our foreign policy or even based off of our economics, which those are kind of the biggest areas that war tends to fall in. I think our sociological issues and our difference of cultures that are really becoming even more heated and skewed are going to be the biggest areas that we're going to have to address internally if we're ever going to kind of unite again behind a common cause. And there's a lot of people who feel that common causes like that, when we get a foreign enemy who we can all agree is a problem, tends to unite us for a short period of time, but it never seems to resolve the actual differences that we're dealing with internally.
Yeah, I can definitely see that. The whole events around 9/11 really did work to get us all together against the common enemy. But you're absolutely right. It didn't keep us together. There was nothing to keep Republicans from hating Democrats and vice versa. And but yeah, that common enemy thing definitely seemed to get us all in line there for a while, and created some really bad situations. But yeah, what would it take to get us together again as a country? Yeah, what would it take? Are we talking about another terrorist attack to be able to get California back in line with Arizona and
It's a
Missouri
great
in line
question,
with
and you know
Florida?
what? I would almost want to say, I don't know if a large terrorist attack or even a direct attack from a foreign nation would actually be enough at this point to unite some of the differences that we have. For example, if you do look at the war that just broke out in Israel, the fact that we have probably just as many people who are supporting the cause for Hamas as we do people who are supporting the cause for Israel kind of speaks to the culture of our own society here, is that we're really torn on a lot of the issues that really tend to go back to, I think it really spends most of our time going back to worldviews. I think people are really trying to decide, how we should perceive our own place in this world, not just individually, but culturally as well. And they're coming into conflict with a lot of opposing worldviews. And the problem is when everybody thinks that they're right. I think Abraham Lincoln, since you brought him up, he said a quote once that I thought was so well put. He said, both sides of our war are convinced that they're on the side of right. And he said, both sides might be, but one side must be wrong. Because it's really simple. You can't be right and wrong at the same time in a conflict.
Right.
So the only thing we can know for sure is that there's a lot of people wrong involved. Who is right is something that becomes a real question of worldviews. And I think that's why it really comes down to it.
The people who are right are the ones who win because they write history.
I was just
historically speaking, I would say that that's how they're going to write it. Yeah, if you ask, because there's a lot of these counter arguments that you see play out throughout history. For example, when someone's saying, if you're on the side of the current Israel conflict and you're saying, okay, well, I side with the Israelis because that was their original land. Okay, well, are you the kind of person then that immediately would turn around and say, I support giving the Native Americans back their original land? They were here first, weren't they? So at what point does the arguments become counterproductive to what's going out there? And that's why one of the things I always liked as an intelligence guy, as a military guy, we really kind of made it very simple. It doesn't matter what was. What matters is what is and what will be. You have to study what was so you can understand where you are. That's true. But that has nothing to do with trying to bring us to where we're going to go. We have to decide exactly where we're at by looking at it realistically and holistically, good and bad, and then making the decision about where we're going to move together as a whole. And that doesn't happen anymore because one thing that we have seen play out in our own government, there's no such thing as compromise left in our government. You're either all to the left or all to the right. And if you're in the middle, then both sides are just telling you to pick a side. So it's unfortunate because that is the kind of stuff that is the prelude to conflict.
Yeah, I see that. I've lived outside of the U.S. for 15 years. So I get to see what's happening in the U.S. from that point of view. Now, I do spend time every year in the U.S., but the vast majority of my time is outside of the U.S. And what I've seen is fucking crazy, guys. And the people that I talk to, the cultures that I'm around, they think America has lost its fucking mind.
Yeah,
they're not entirely wrong.
Is cussing okay? I'm trying to be family friendly here.
I don't censor. I don't censor.
Cool. Yeah. People come to me and they're like, what the fuck is wrong with you Americans? And I'm like, look, I don't live in America. I just have an American passport.
Yeah.
I don't vote in any elections. I don't reside in America. I'm just a passionate observer. And what I've come to see is that when I was a kid, I like to think that Bill Clinton was the last sensible president. I feel like when he was president, the Republicans and the Democrats were capable of working together.
Yeah.
And after that, everything kind of started falling apart. And you asked before, what needs to happen for Americans to be able to come together again? I'm not sure it's possible. I don't think anything could happen that would make that possible.
Yeah.
I hope I'm wrong, but it's hard to see that. It's very difficult to see a post-COVID, post-Trump America that is capable of communicating with one another. Seriously.
I would agree that there's probably a huge communication issue. And I think
There always
that,
is.
for example, it's always fun when people kind of point out the kind of hypocrisies in everyone's logic. I once heard someone say that, if you're far left, you're basically a communist. And then someone says, if you're far right, you're basically a Nazi. And they'll call each other that. And for the first time in my, history that I can recall of being alive on, for 40 years now, I think they're both right. We've gotten to the point where they're both so extreme that they're not willing to budge anymore. And you can hear the arguments being played out by both sides in context where it's like, yeah, you guys aren't going to allow for anything. For example, in the and the kinds of fights that we have now, let me preface it with that, are things that we probably never would have even anticipated 10 years ago. Who would have thought we were going to be having a huge fight over the definition of male or female or anything in between? Fight around that for what was considered to be something that was just kind of a given. Now it's a huge issue across all spectrums. Some people, and it's interesting because what you'll hear is the counterproductive argument when people are saying we're supposed to all love each other, and if you don't, I'll hate you.
Right.
It's like you don't even see that you're causing a lot of the issues is in your own mind of the context of you're trying to force something that's supposed to be for good, but your only way of trying to force something that you believe is good is through hate. Well, you're not accomplishing anything. You're not going to win anybody through hate. That's one of the things that, if there was one thing warfare did teach me, you don't win hearts and minds with bullets and bombs.
Yeah.
Because those aren't designed for good.
No.
Those are designed for one purpose and one purpose only, and that is to destroy something. Now, how you use those forces is something that, that's going to be a big issue in there. So I'm certainly not the kind of advocate who sits there and says, if we just had no weaponry, everything would be good in this world. Bull crap. People would beat each other with rocks and they would strangle each other. They don't need weapons to kill each other. All they need is hate. And if there's one thing there's no shortage of on this planet, it's hate.
Yeah.
So that's the only thing I really see kind of doing this is because people don't want to acknowledge certain levels of hate or certain aspects of their own views, that what they're doing is they're digging their heels in and saying, if you don't believe like me, then you're obviously an enemy. Well, why can't I disagree with you and still be a friend?
Right.
That doesn't exist anymore.
Why can't we disagree agreeably? It just it doesn't happen.
Social media.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would agree. I would agree entirely. Sean just nailed it.
Yeah.
Social media. I think the communication aspect of modern technology has gotten to a point where, because people are not held accountable for their own words as they were. I mean, let's face it. If someone walks right up to your face in like the 1980s when I was in school and somebody came up and pushed you, you hit them back.
Yeah.
And then all it was you went to the office. The only question they had was who started it.
Right.
It wasn't who got hurt, who initiated the actual conflict. And I remember having bullies that tried to bully us, and then the bullying went away when you socked them in the jaw or you took out their tooth. Suddenly they are not bullying anymore. They learned there's a consequence to those actions. But now we have to make sure that everybody's feeling good. Well, the problem is that we've learned that because we've taken away any aspect of real felt consequence, it means that everything is now done in the realm of words. And in words, we can stir up a lot, but there's no felt consequence until it's too late. Because if there's one element that I've also seen true is that sticks and stones may break your bones, but words can start a revolution.
Yeah.
So you got to, people can hide behind their keyboards now and never really have to worry about it.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's definitely.
I'm sorry, say it again, Sean. I didn't hear.
Like in Myanmar.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah, I could see that. Yeah.
Yeah.
They used Bill, in case you're not aware.
Okay.
They used
Yeah,
Facebook.
I'm not.
So some radical. This radical. I think he was Buddhist. Honestly,
I think he was
guy,
Buddhist.
Radical
which
Buddhist.
was quite strange because I've spent years among Buddhist. So it's very strange. There was this like radical Buddhist. I don't want to say cleric because cleric is really more closer to the Muslim religion, but this radical Buddhist leader convinced people in Myanmar that the Rohingya Muslims were their enemy, and through Facebook alone was able to ignite a genocide.
Wow.
Over several years.
Okay.
And there were people that worked for Facebook that were on the ground, and people who didn't work for Facebook who were on the ground, who went to Facebook and said, guys, you are enabling genocide. You need to start, or you're enabling the precursor to potential violence. You need to do something about this. And Facebook decided not to do anything about it for years until a genocide started. And it's now ongoing for, I think it's 2 or 3 years now.
It's been going up a couple of years now. See, and this is where you definitely come into the conflict, because there's truth that the words carry power, but there's also truth that when you censor people's language, that creates a whole different can of worms, and it creates a whole nother level of things. In fact, there's often times where people who are screaming absolute rhetoric, once they become censored, they were just considered to be buffoons before, and as soon as they're censored, that almost adds legitimacy to their argument, because people are like, oh, they don't want you to hear this. So, and then everybody starts going on that bandwagon. So it's unfortunate that that's kind of the whole element. That's why, again, with the modern technology, the communication factor is no longer personal. It's something that can be done at a distance, and because of that, it can be done maliciously.
Yeah, we have.
I'm very fortunate that when I was in China, we had the.
That's
Sorry,
okay.
Bill. I was very fortunate that being in China, we had the Great Firewall to a point where I wasn't able to access any of these social media platforms while I was there. And so I basically spent all of my 20s and early 30s with no access to social media. And I, to this day, despite living outside of China for, I guess it's 6 years now, I do not feel any sort of addiction or desire to touch any social media platform. And I feel quite happy for that. I know many people that are addicted to these platforms, and I'm like, why? Just turn it off.
Well, it actually causes the same. They've even done scientific studies where that little ping, or that, if someone likes your post or whatever, it actually creates the exact same dopamine as if you took a hit of a drug. So yeah, it is a very addictive concept, and unfortunately, because it's become almost the main tool for communication now, it doesn't matter which platform, just social media in general. The only way to actually get news in front of people who are trying to need it, or to even give warnings about social media, the only place to put it so they'll actually consume it is on the very thing you don't need them on. So, because that's where they're at. That's the only place that they get their information.
Yeah. Kind of like when.
So it's kind of this, for lack of better words, it's almost a checkmate.
Yeah. Well, it's weird how people get their information. It changes so dramatically from era to era, if you will. But reminds me of when seemed like everybody was getting their news from the Daily Show, and during the Jon Stewart era. And it's like, yeah, let's go to Comedy Central for our news, and now it's let's go to TikTok for our news. But yeah, it's like it is the social media and internet has the ability to protect you from both anonymously by creating an ability to be anonymous. I mean, you're a username now. You're not even your real name. And you can say, it's like I think I put on my Facebook that I'm everywhere, as opposed to saying that I'm in Malden, Missouri. So it's like, yeah, there's this protection that's afforded, so you can say anything. And to your point, Chris, nobody's going to punch me in my face, because nobody's going to see what because they don't even know who I am. And it's crazy.
So in China, the government forces people to use their real identification. So they force you to verify your identity whenever you create an account on any platform, on Chinese platforms. So that way you know who they are. And so the government can monitor everyone. They know exactly who you are, where you live, and what you're saying when you say it. And they know where you are when you say it. And so, if they don't like it, they can stop you. Or they can pick you up off the
Sean,
street.
I'd actually then ask the question, do you feel that's a good thing or a bad thing?
That's a very difficult question to answer, because there's two ways to look at it, right? So one of the things you have to understand is that I lived there for 10 years. And so it's a huge part of my identity, because I'm only 37 and I moved there when I was 20. I just turned 22. So it was my first country as an adult, my first job out of university, right? So it's a very deeply ingrained part of my personality and who I am. And so in some ways, I can identify with the way they run things and why they do it. But there's also that American side of me that goes, this is absolute bonkers. So on one hand, I understand it. On the other hand, I go, I don't like it. But it makes sense to have people verify who they are because there are real life repercussions for saying stupid stuff. But on the other hand, there's people that are saying real things, trying to help the society get better, and then they get purged for speaking the truth. So it's a good thing in the right hands. It's a bad thing in the wrong hands.
I would agree with that assessment, and then that falls back to the original conflict that always has: who's the right person to monitor that, and how do you make sure that they're got oversight?
Never
and
a
that's
government.
a difficult. Well, there's name a government on this planet that's not self-serving. I mean, there's no government that's going to try and make sure everything is done for its own benefit. And in the context of good or bad, when it's done for the government's own benefit, what if that means that it hurts people within their government or it hurts people within their country? If it's for the good of the government, maybe it's fine. And that's a view that is held by a lot of people today, especially. It's always funny I have found it very interesting when people talk of, since we're kind of in the geopolitical arena, when people in America are specifically trying to point out that no, we're in a favor of democratic socialism as opposed to just socialism. And the first question you have is, do you understand socialism? And if so, how does democracy work with it? You don't get to have those two. That's kind of like saying, I'm going to have oil and water and they will mix. No, they're not going to mix. There's just something in there that's going to tear it apart because there's certain elements about them that don't work together.
I think America is far more to the right as a whole, as a nation, than people realize. I think it's moved in that direction. Yes, a lot more than it used to be.
Well, I think that has a lot to do, whether it's America or any other country, the real simple thing is for short-term gain of power, for anybody who's trying to actually gain that, the more comfortable you can make the regular people, the more power you'll gain quickly. The only difference is how you accomplish that and what does that do over the long term. And most of the time, a population in general usually does not care about the long-term repercussions. They just want the immediate comforts. As long as you're willing to give those, they'll give you support. And then when the support starts fading, that's where you start running into problems. And that's usually where the name blame starts coming. Oh, well, actually, we were doing everything fine until that other guy. Because, for example, I very much do tend to lean more conservative with a lot of my views. But in the conservative viewpoint, they would love to say that Ronald Reagan is one of the greatest presidents that's ever been. But economically speaking, when they talk about Reaganomics, it did make things easier for the normal person down low, but if you want to find a launch pad that immediately started us down our road to debt, it happened in that era. The way that it got shifted and our debt that we've been continually gradually, accumulating more and more and more on top actually started in the Reaganomics era because of the changes that were made. So what we're seeing now are some of the long-term effects of what that did. And people are kind of, again, it's just they were good with the short-term things. They attribute it to who it was at the time. They're like, okay, things were good under Reagan. Things were good under Clinton. And Clinton probably was when America was at the height of economics, was probably in the late 90s.
Yeah, I was going to say, didn't Clinton balance the budget and get rid of a deficit? Wasn't he like the only president that ever
he got it balanced? He got to where we were starting to move the needle in the other direction. And if things had continued the way that they were supposed to, and this is an element that a lot of people don't grasp, but when the attacks on September 11th actually did occur, one of the factors that they were taking into effect with their choices of targets and how they were going to hit these areas was the economics, because they knew that we were such a economically sound and strong country that if they could change things up, we could start moving the needle back in the other direction and start pushing us further into debt. And it worked. Because not only did we respond economically to certain areas, but obviously militarily and other areas that then required more spending. And so, yeah, it accelerated us heading down the other direction. So you could almost say that to one effect, they probably succeeded at one of their goals that they were trying to do, which was to start making the American dollar less.
What do you mean by less?
Well, for example, how much is a gallon of milk? Yeah, exactly. How much is a gallon of milk now as opposed to what it was
almost
before
$4
the
a
war
gallon
started?
here.
You mean to
And
try
that's
to
not
deflate the
regular
value of the
inflation.
dollar?
You got it. So, and the gas prices, things like that. That's why, the energy crises that people have been talking about. And then that's one of the things that the Trump supporters were in favor of, because he was trying to push for more internal forms of our energy consumption. I mean, these are all things that people want to try and nitpick, I guess, certain topics. But the thing is, it's not just as simple as topic A solved and moved on, topic B solved and move on. They're all intertwined with each other. So as you affect one area, it's going to do something else in some other areas. And that's why it's always this kind of difficult back and forth. And I think that the American population, what they'll vote for in general, tends to be whatever the sociological elements that are like the highest and the most brought to surface at the time. That's what they're going to vote on. So that's why I do think social media has become such a huge tool that both sides, in fact, even outside sources, all wield when it comes to deciding how we're going to make decisions about our own government. The more misinformation they can put out there, or the more that they can emotionally charge things towards an agenda that they want, the more effective it's going to be. It doesn't necessarily matter about what the truth is.
That's true.
Chris, I want to I want to go back to the thing about foreign languages.
That's okay.
Sorry, Bill, I'm hijacking your show. So it may not be apparent, but I am fluent and literate in.
No kidding.
Wow.
I taught myself. So I thought maybe you guys might be interested in knowing more about China internally. So I figured I would offer myself up there.
Well, I would actually love now when it comes to the Taiwan, since that's in particular, since you were talking about, I'd love to hear kind of a more Chinese perspective on that one, because I'll be honest with you guys, I actually lost a bet when Biden took office. Some of my old friends and we said, you know what, because of the administration change, and then when we saw what happened with the Afghanistan pullout, we said when the Afghanistan pullout did what it did and it went down the way it did, we said it's either going to be Ukraine or Taiwan, but there's going to be a move made because now's the time to do it. I actually voted it was going to be Taiwan. I really did think that was going to be the one that was going to happen. I wasn't expecting Ukraine to hit as drastic as it did. And I also agree with your assessment that I think that I almost think that Taiwan probably would have escalated further had Ukraine not happened, because it would have probably given them a little bit more opportunity to test the waters. But when they did see that America was going to throw a lot of money behind it, it made them at least be like, maybe we just wait a little bit longer. That's my assessment. I don't know if it's accurate. So, but I'd love to hear the perspective on China.
Well, obviously there's going to be two perspectives. There's going to be the government's perspective and the citizens' perspective.
Right.
To the best of my understanding, the citizens' perspective is it's irrelevant because COVID destroyed the economy, and the trade war that Trump started with China destroyed the economy, and Evergrande destroyed the economy, and the lack of population growth is destroying the economy, and private for-profit education is destroying the economy. There's a lot of factors going against China being successful in the long term. Xi Jinping is exacerbating the entire thing. So the individuals are not concerned with Taiwan. There might be a portion of the Chinese population that is brainwashed to a point that they're nationalistic enough to go, yeah, Taiwan's part of China. But I would say the vast majority of educated Chinese people are well enough aware of the macro situation to go, this is irrelevant. We can't afford to survive. We can't afford to have children. We can't afford to buy properties. And our future looks quite bleak, economically speaking, because we don't have the opportunity that we did 5 or 10 years ago. The government's perspective is, and maybe the government at large disagrees with Xi Jinping, because this is one of Xi Jinping's personal goals, is to reclaim Taiwan, just like he did with Macau and Hong Kong, right? He succeeded in those two. Xi Jinping desperately wants Taiwan because, like Putin, he desires enlargement. He desires the glory of reclaiming what was once lost at the cost of anything else. So Putin and Xi are very similar in their desires. It's extremely obvious. And I think one of the only reasons why Xi has not attacked Taiwan yet is because he doesn't believe China has the capability to beat the US in a one-on-one war. However, he's putting significant resources into developing the capabilities to have a fighting chance. At the same time, Xi is extremely intelligent and very careful. However, he's also made some really stupid decisions that have really negatively impacted the population and the economy, which is quite interesting to me how he would allow himself to make those decisions. However, he's also guided by the hand of Mao Zedong. His father was a close ally in the early days, and so Xi Jinping is considered a princeling. However, his father was purged, and Xi did spend some time in the villages away from Beijing. And so he did get to see both sides. He got to see the love of Mao, and he got to see the wrath of Mao. But in his eyes, he believes that Mao Zedong, a single totalitarian leader who has complete control over everything in the country, is the only way to lead the country. And therefore, I believe, like Putin, he has lost the group of people around him that would tell him he's wrong because he's purged them all. And so he's currently making harsh decisions that are probably not based on fact anymore. And so he desperately wants Taiwan. He doesn't have the capability to fight that war. And he's trying to harass Taiwan as much as he can. And he's trying to see how Ukraine happens with how Ukraine and Israel continue. And if you were, since you're military intelligence, you probably have seen that China has made it clear that they support Hamas, not Israel, even though Hamas provides no value whatsoever to China, economically speaking. But Israel was a huge trade partner for China. A lot of Israelis did business in China for a very long time. Israel and China had a very positive relationship. Well, they probably destroyed that just saying we support Hamas. So China is at a very, very strange point in the world, in its history, because its population is falling apart, its economy is falling apart from multiple points, from multiple angles. And you have this leader that's out of touch with the world, desperately clinging to power, probably dealing with assassination attempts all over. There's probably a massive amount of infighting. We'll never hear about any of it. And he just keeps saying, I want Taiwan. At the same time, I'm not sure if you saw the most recent map that came out from China, where they added a 10th dashed line, which encompasses Taiwan. They're taking away land from Bhutan, they're taking away land from Nepal, and just going, this is our land now. They're taking away land from northeastern India, and they're just basically bullying the hell out of everyone. They're even taking land from Russia, near Vladivostok, like the northeastern region of China.
Yeah, from the seaports area. Yeah.
They're also building land all over, or they're building islands all across the South China Sea. They're harassing the Philippines, they're harassing Vietnam, they're harassing all their neighbors. They're just bullying everyone. And then you get to the Belt and Road Initiative, where they're plunking trillions of dollars into basically economically trapping 100 countries around the world into debt by offering them infrastructure solutions that they pay for, but for which is not properly developed, which is crumbling and for which those countries are in debt. And Sri Lanka is the first country to collapse economically due to their debt to China. And so what's happening is a lot of countries, and on top of that, there's this thing called wolf warrior diplomacy, where basically China was bullying people politically. They were publicly coming out and going, oh, you shouldn't be saying that about China, trying to force governments into supporting China. They did this with the WHO. They basically bribed the World Health Organization into not investigating COVID properly. And there's just so many things that China is doing, and I see it as a house of cards. I can't see it going on. I can't see it lasting. I don't know how much longer it will, but
I would agree with a lot of that. And actually, because of what some of the things you're saying, one of the areas that they might be trying to do then is, as they're pushing these small scale kind of bullying tactics, as you described it, into certain areas, in a way, they're almost probably trying to goad the United States into actually committing somewhere else again on a full scale initiative. That way, if we're fully committed to something, we won't have as much available to actually try and counter what they might try to do. And I think that one element actually was something that was taken into consideration when the Ukraine war kicked off. It was not outside the realm of feasibility to consider if we were going to be sending American forces in, but the decision was made against it. And I think that was probably made correctly, because as long as our forces are not actively partaking in certain areas and are available for deployment to areas where they could be needed, that means that's the safeguard that's keeping a lot of the kind of aggression of certain areas down. But it's scary because, like you said, with that house of cards kind of concept too, when time becomes a factor, that's when people start pushing harsher agendas, bigger mistakes, and sometimes even things that we can't, recover from. So if they're internally dealing with a lot of stuff and then they need something external to try and reignite it, that could create a need for them to try and do something that would end up being something that would require a response, maybe not even just from the United States. At that point, it might be something that could involve UN or even NATO.
So there is a time factor to this, because as you may have become aware recently, the Chinese population census numbers kind of became more clear. I believe they had to revise their numbers downward like 100 million people. So they basically lied for the last decade or two about how many people they had. And so I believe they claimed that the first time they actually lost, their population shrank was, I think, a year ago or 2 years ago. Assuming we could even believe that, it could be even worse. So China has a massive, they have a massive army of people that have no experience whatsoever in combat. And the number of people are shrinking. So they have a short period of time, and by short I mean several decades max, to make a move to replenish their population. So some of the things that they've done to try to fix this is they banned for-profit education, because people were spending a significant amount of their extra income, liquid income,
dispensable income,
the name for
disposable.
But they were taking money that so they were taking a massive amount of their disposable income to pay for after-school classes for their children, to allow the children to have a chance of having an edge against the others, because on average every year they were having up to 5 million people taking a test to enter colleges around the country. And so you have this this issue where the more you spend, the perception was the more you spend, the larger the gap might be between your child and another child. And so the government said, well, in order for us to get people to want to have more children, because we're fucked, we need to get rid of for-profit education, because that's where people are spending their money. Well, guess what? The response was nothing changed. All they did was destroy an industry. One of the problems that caused this was the one-child policy. The one-child policy put them in a position where they didn't have enough people they didn't have enough children per family to replenish the population, right? So there wasn't, they weren't at least keeping, or not every family had a child, but if you had a child, you only had one person coming into each family. And so after a long enough period of time, you basically collapse your economy because I guess the number is 2.1. You need to have at least 2 children for every 2 adults in order to keep things going. And so you see Japan, South Korea, United States, a number of countries are having this problem now. And so the one-child policy kicked that off. And at some point during this, in the last 15 years, the women of China started to have a personal awakening and a desire to have their own careers, to travel, to make their own money, kind of what women experienced in America starting several decades earlier. So on top of that, because of the one-child policy, there were less women being born, because if you can only have one, you want someone that will bring a woman into your family, then have your child, your female child, leave your family, right? So it wasn't like having a child was a disgrace, but it was an economic waste, right? Having a female child, you're going to put money into this child, and the child, when they get older and get married, they're going to leave your family and go live with the other family. So they're going to bring value to the other family, but you're going to waste your money. This created an imbalance and forced the parents of the male to create a dowry, to the point that I have a friend who ended up giving his wife for a dowry. She's from Shanghai. He gave her $1 million US in cash, and he bought her a house in Shanghai, which was also nearly $1 million. Now, he's quite wealthy personally, and her family, she was even wealthier than him, but that was the dowry he had to pay to become her husband. And so everyone bought property in China because you needed a house and a car to woo a woman, to marry her, to tell her family, I can take care of your child. I can give her a child. I can provide. So you have all of this money going into these ridiculous things. So you have this one-child policy. You end up having more women than men. The women are seen as economically unviable. But then at some point, the women decide, you know what, we do have value. We're going to have our own careers. We're going to grow and do our own things. And so now you have less marriages because women are putting off marriage to promote their own careers, like you see across the world. And you see less children being born. And you see the cost of living skyrocketing, but the salaries not rising to match that. And so the cost of giving birth to a child is untenable. And so the government at that point decides, you can now have 2 children, to which people go, we can't even afford 1. Why are we going to have 2? And then the government says you can have 3. And then COVID happens and people start dying. And so the population is absolutely fucked. I cannot see a way for them to get out of the trap that they've created for themselves. And I was saying, even in 2008, when I first got to China, obviously I'm an individual person. I have no way to tell the government what to do. But in my head, I could see the problem in 2008. And I was like, guys, why don't you just let them have as many kids as they want? Right? Because in 2008, things were different. You could afford to have a second kid at that time, but now it's impossible. So China basically has a massive time bomb that has already gone off. It's impossible to fix. And so the number of children is dwindling, and Taiwan is a way for them to try to fix the problem. So if you can bring all of those people from Taiwan into the Chinese kind of sphere, then you can hope to replenish the population. Like Russia was taking Ukrainian kids and forcibly removing them and putting them into Russia to try to build their population, despite losing over 500,000 of their own young male citizens because of the war with Ukraine. So China is absolutely desperate and screwed on multiple fronts. Economically, financially, politically. People, a lot of countries don't trust them anymore because of all the shit they've pulled. So I'm surprised she's still alive, to be honest.
Xi Jinping,
because he's caused a lot
correct
of
me if I'm wrong, but Xi Jinping now pretty much is going to be whatever it is he is. What do they call him? President or chairman or whatever his job title is.
he's our dear leader.
Dear leader for life.
He's
Yeah,
our
I was
dear
going to say,
leader for
now that
life.
he's dear leader for life, the for life part, that, he's not desperate to stay in power, so he can pretty much be emboldened to do whatever he feels he needs to create his legacy, if you will. So yeah.
I think he's fighting for his life. I think
Okay.
there's a number of people trying to kill him. So he might be leader,
Right.
but that doesn't mean it's forever. I think him and Putin
Okay.
both have their days numbered.
Wow.
Well, one thing that we've certainly seen is true is the most dangerous time to corner a wounded animal, or the most dangerous time to corner an animal, is when they're wounded. So, when they finally feel like they're backed into certain corners, just given the nature of both of these kinds of leaders, it's more likely that they're going to lash out rather than capitulate and fold. So I do think that we're going to see some interesting moves. I think that I know a lot of people tend to put a lot of it on the United States, but believe it or not, I actually think that the majority of what's going to take place as far as the counter moves will be coming out of Europe. If the European countries that make up, especially NATO, but the United Nations and a lot of these areas, if they can move together with a singular purpose to counter some of these moves, I think you'll see them have minimal effect, and it will eventually just kind of fizzle away because there's just too much opposition to some of those elements. But the question there is, just to be blunt and direct, is what's the gain for the Europeans if they get involved on that scale? Because they're not tied to a lot of the things that we are. So they're tied through us, right? There's not a lot for them to want to get involved other than just to see it not explode. And I think that a lot of the countries, especially on the economic side, are trying to detach themselves from the United States dollar simply because, since we are involved on so many different areas in this, that if something blows up and we end up having to respond to it, I don't think they want to have to go down with the ship kind of thing. And I think we do have some good allies that we'd be able to depend on regardless of what's going on, because we're very, very mutually driven about a lot of our elements. But as a whole, I don't know if you'll see the European Union as a whole do that. And I actually, given the nature of my latest work, which actually is in eschatology, it's interesting that one of the things that might very well be needed on the world scale is, like we had kind of alluded to in the initial stages, is an orator or a narrator or an individual who can actually unite a lot of these different elements together for a common cause. And what's scary is, biblically speaking, that's actually something that they said is going to take place, but it's not a good person in the Bible stories. So it's interesting because it's weird to see how it does all come back to the more we have shrunk our ability to communicate as a world, the more we are finding that the differences that we used to be able to tolerate because of distance are now becoming forefront, and a lot of these things aren't going to get resolved with people just kind of talking it out.
I don't think Europe is going to do anything. I think each of the individual European countries don't have strong enough economies or militaries to do anything and anywhere. And I think collectively they don't have the willpower to get together in a meaningful way. They struggle to support each other at the EU level.
Mm-hmm.
And Macron has tried desperately, since he became president of France, to advocate for a stronger European Union, something that's more cohesive, that's more structured. And the general consensus from the other countries was, that's not. And Germany, Merkel was that orator. She was that advocate for a strong Europe.
Right.
And she's gone. And I don't think we're going to see a replacement for her anytime soon. I think some people hoped that Olaf Scholz would take over for her, but he just doesn't have that same skill. And he's doing a lot to actually damage Germany.
Yeah, I would agree that I don't know.
I don't think he means to, but he is.
Yeah, I don't know if there's. I agree that of all the world leaders that we see in Europe right now, I don't know if who I would say, hey, this person's got the ability to unite them all. I don't know if that exists right now. But I do know that if you can, again, since we were talking about kind of an outside cause, I do see a potential with the pieces that are already in place that there might be an outside cause that starts forcing Europe to try and move in that direction. And that actually is the fact that still a good portion of the energy resources that is consumed by Europe still comes from Russia. And I think that as Israel has been really ramping up their energy production, especially in the world of natural gas, there's a real possibility that they could even start moving the needle about how they can supply the needs even of Europe. And I think they're even talking about building a pipeline through Cyprus or through one of the areas. But if it got to the point where Israel is fully capable of doing that, and it would end up making a bit of a challenge for Russia, because one of the things Russia has right now is their kind of counter to a lot of the European and potential involvement is their ability to turn off the gas. But if the gas can now be gotten from an outside source, specifically Israel, that could change things politically. So it is, I mean, again, but this is when we do this hypotheses of these what ifs, there's a lot that goes into it. And I really do appreciate your breakdown of the Chinese perspective, because again, as someone, I've never been to China, even though I've been to a lot of places, never been there. And I do know that Taiwan, not just for the population, but also for, like you had mentioned earlier, their industry around, especially with technology, is massive.
Yeah.
And
That's their
if
only
they could
industry.
incorporate that, yeah, I mean that's basically that's how they survive. And if that were to get incorporated and folded into the Chinese realm
That's
of
also
sphere,
dangerous. It's
I
also
agree.
one of the reasons why the U.S. is so interested in Taiwan is because it hasn't built up its own semiconductor technologies yet. Even though Biden pledged $50 billion to support companies that want to build their fabs in the U.S. Having China specifically control Taiwan would be dangerous, because China could decide who it wants to let have semiconductors.
Mm-hmm.
China is so think about this then from the other point of view. China's incensed because if the US builds up its own technologies and prevents China from having Taiwan and prevents China from building its own technology, basically the US decides China's ability to evolve itself. So oftentimes as Americans, we do a great job of going, we're the good guys, you're the enemy, you're the bad guy. But oftentimes Americans don't have the ability to see from the other point of view why this is happening. So I almost hate to do this because it's going on right now. I'm Jewish. I've been to Israel multiple times. I do not speak Hebrew. I have family from Israel. I think the entire thing is absolutely fucked up from both sides. I understand why Hamas attacked Israel. I understand why Israel is responding in this way. But if Israel didn't treat Gazans like dirt, they probably wouldn't have been willing to allow Iran to fund them and turn them into terrorists so that then they could attack Israel. So I can see from both points of view without having any sort of emotional attachment to either side. I can appreciate why both sides are doing things. And that's one of the reasons why I'm interested in many other countries, because I can see why Poland is doing what it's doing. It's scared of Russia. I can understand why Russia did what it did to Ukraine. It's scared of NATO. I can understand why China is doing what it is in Taiwan. It's scared of the US controlling its semiconductor abilities, right? Everything goes back to cause and effect. And if the US didn't do that in Taiwan, China might not be so afraid. If NATO didn't try to expand, Putin may not be so afraid, right? So all of these conflicts have a root cause, and therefore they have a response and an effect.
Mhm.
So as long as we keep doing the things we're doing, we will cause other things to happen to us.
That's
And
human history.
Right. And so if anyone listening gets anything out of anything I've said, it's before you make an assumption about anything, try to understand the other side, because you will then see why this is happening and therefore why you feel this way and therefore why they feel that way.
I would agree. You do have to, and actually it's the intelligence community, that's actually rule number 1. That's intelligence 101. Emotion leaves the room. It's just cause and effect. We're going to look at the chess game for what it is. I mean, if you go back to even September, let's go to December 7th, 1941, Pearl Harbor. Japan didn't wake up one day and say, you know what would be a great idea? Out of the blue, I think what we should do is just go sink as many ships as we can for the American fleet. There was a purpose and a cause and a reason. And part of that was actually some of the sanctions we had put on Japan. So they were in a pickle where they said, look, we have enough resources to basically either capitulate to all the demands of everybody else who's making them of us, or we can go to war. And we have enough resources to fight a war on a small scale for a short period of time, very aggressively. And if you look at their opening volleys of fire, that's exactly what they did. As quickly as possible, take out the main targets and then expand to the areas that you need. That's why they hit Borneo. That's why they hit the Philippines. They were hitting all the areas that had natural resources that they didn't have, so that they can control those, and then they could grow themselves. And then after that, it just turned into, okay, great, now let's guard what we got. But in the context of trying to sink the American fleet, and starting December 7th, you've got the problem of the Americans are going to respond. And in that response, we won. On the same note with September 11th, when that all happened, yes, the economics of the whole thing and what it did to the loss of life is something that, as the receivers of that attack, we definitely know the victimization that it caused. But the initiating factors why they did it have things that go all the way back to even when we were divvying up the Middle East amongst ourselves as the world powers that won World War II, to include Israel itself. Israel being a nation didn't even happen until 1948. And it was voted into place. That's the only time that's ever happened in history. Someone said, yeah, we're going to vote this new country into existence. Never happened before. So, I mean, there's all these causes, and you're spot on. If you're not willing to look at the whole picture about why people are doing the way that they are, you're just going to react. If all you're ever doing is reacting, you're never going to gain anything, because you're never going to build. You're just going to keep reacting to whatever happens.
Wow. Yeah.
True.
Yeah. Cause and effect. It's a bitch. But yeah. So yeah, I was.
Well, yeah. If you look at cause and effect, you can see World War I caused World War II. Right.
Correct. World War II caused all the stuff we've been dealing with now.
Yeah. World War II caused the Cold War. It caused the space race. It caused Ukraine.
Yeah.
It caused all of these things.
It did. It caused the Israeli conflict that's going on right now.
Well, if Israel wasn't a nation,
that actual conflict goes all the way back to
Isaac and Ishmael.
Well, you got to remember Israel's. Well, exactly. It goes all the way back to the original sons of Abraham. So, it's interesting that these things. It's just that's the whole point, is that human history. Everybody seems to think we're just kind of here and we'll get by, and you live and you die, you have some kids, and in the meantime, just have as much fun as you can. But the reality is, a lot of the choices that get made, even in our lifetimes today, these are the things that our ancestors are going to be dealing with.
That's why I like Star Trek.
Yes, indeed.
I feel very negative about the future, and it scares me to bring children into the world. But then I watch Star Trek and I think, well, maybe if my kids can survive, maybe in a few hundred years it won't be so bad anymore. Maybe we can find a way through it. Maybe it requires a World War III. Maybe it requires a nuclear holocaust. But hopefully we can figure shit out.
I've seen Dr. Strangelove, so I don't think the nuclear holocaust is going to help.
Well, if we get rid of a majority of...
Well, it's interesting because it's kind of ingrained into us personally, like human beings just in general. We always kind of have this innate concept that somehow or another, everything that is going to come to an end somehow. We all know that. And if you ask people, hey, do you think that the world is going to end? Most of them will actually say, yeah, I think so. And then if you ask them in your lifetime, no. But the thing is, that's been the view of anybody who's held any position on this planet since it was created. So
I think so. I'm only a few years younger than you. I don't think you're a millennial though. I think you're like the end of the Gen X line.
I'm in that weird cusp area where I don't get along with anybody. Yeah, the millennials don't like us. The baby boomers don't like us. I think they called us Gen X for a little bit, but even then Gen X kind of got dissected into a different category. So all I can say is I grew up at a time period where the technology was changing enough that I was able to grow with it for a while, make sense of a good portion of it where most of my parents couldn't. Most of the older generation were like, this stuff's beyond us. It's just moving too fast. But then at the same note, when it comes to things like work ethics and values and a lot of the things that are kind of more predominant in the older generation, I still carry a lot of that. So it's interesting that I call myself is the outcast of both sides because.
Okay. So I feel I'm one of the oldest millennials. I don't identify with Gen X at all, but I also don't even come close to identifying with Gen Z. They're very strange.
They're special.
So I feel like my generation is the first generation that honestly believes we cannot give our children better lives than the lives we've had. And I think we also might believe that the world isn't going to end, but our way of life will end in our lifetime. Yeah. The world's not going to end. Humans are just not going to maybe be around, or there'll be less humans.
No. Mm-hmm.
Right. The world will be fine without humans. The world was fine before us. It'll be fine after we're gone.
Unless something happens very soon.
That's true.
I think
people are naive to assume. I think humans are naive to assume that our existence is permanent.
I would agree. Anybody who thinks that, because we've got too much evidence of entire species that have come and gone to think that we're not going to.
We also individually, and I think corporately too, we have this view that we are invincible. Until a person gets hurt, real bad, whether it's breaking a leg or I caught fire. That was how I learned I wasn't invincible. It's like we have this idea that we're immortal and invincible.
That'll do it.
We can do anything, and all you got to do is look at one of these compilations on YouTube of people doing these crazy things, and it's like they think they're indestructible, and they're going to do all this crazy stuff. But yeah, and I think corporately we have kind of that same idea that the United States is always going to be the United States. It hasn't always been as it is, and it certainly won't always be as it is. But we have this idea that it's like, civil war is a crazy idea. It's never going to happen, and that's not necessarily true. It happened once.
That's what people said right up until the 1960s.
The Civil War is happening in countries all around the world all the time.
All the time.
There's actually a lot of them happening this year.
And so I think we need to wise up. Realize that for all these countries in the world, whether it's China or Russia, China especially right now, we're kind of painting them in the corner, like you said, Sean. We're trying to keep them from making their own semiconductors. We're trying to keep them from taking over Taiwan, and we're trying to create our own semiconductors. We're painting them into a corner, and Xi Jinping is looking and saying, "I've only got so much time to be able to do what I want to do, and be the next Mao." Perhaps is part of what his brain is telling him. And so they may not have the time to wait to do something. So who knows what will come next? people could become so desperate to keep things the way they are that we end up in some kind of major world conflict, and hopefully it won't be nuclear, because I've seen some of the projections on that, and it's bad if it comes down to that. But yeah, so we've been doing this for quite a while. So I was going to say, let's go ahead and close on that positive note. Did you have something to say, Sean? I think I heard you click.
I was gonna say, the best thing you can do for yourself now is buy some land, learn how to farm, learn how to hunt, learn how to be self-sufficient.
Yeah, self-sufficiency is always a good thing. We only got a quarter acre, but it's enough to plant a little garden and stuff. So, and my brother wants to take me out hunting, so we'll get all that going. Not too much opportunity to hunt in Vegas.
Just learn how to use bows and arrows. Learn how to use analog technology. Yep.
I've got my machete, and I'm gonna get a bow and arrow. So yeah, I think I missed.
You'll run out of bullets, but you won't run out of wood to make arrows.
So with that, yes, always look on the bright side of life. But do you gentlemen have any final words for the nice people? That's right.
Shout out to Monty Python. Yeah.
This has been a masterclass in fatalism.
So, well, God bless to all you guys. And, the only thing I would say is my parting gift for everybody is very simply, granted, there's a lot going on, but if you're more worried about what's going on in the White House than you are what's going on in your house, then you've already kind of lost your ability to influence anything. You got to focus on keeping yourself straight, your family straight. So I agree with Sean's assessment. Just start finding ways to make sure that you're focusing on, how am I going to be okay? How's my family going to be okay? Work on that first. And then from there, trust me, the world's problems will be there when you, whether you like it or not, they're going to be there. So,
Sean, before we get to your final words, I almost forgot to promote your stuff again. Sean, your website is welivetobuild.com. Is that right? Okay. And people can go there. I'll leave the link in the description so people can find it real easily. But you can go over there to find his podcast. There's a blog and all of his business stuff over there. Hire him and get your business going. And then Chris, yours is chrisfwalker.com, correct? Okay, and we will we'll have the link to yours in there, and that's where people can find your books.
They can find my books. Sweet. We've got some training programs we've done. Actually, even Sean might even appreciate one of the ones during COVID. I even did a kind of an entrepreneurial video training segment, just to kind of be like, here's the basics of how to get a business started.
Cool. So, okay.
Yeah, a lot of good stuff
so all that stuff will be in the description. And I think we've had an absolutely awesome show. I don't think we've gotten so deep into international politics and history as we have today. Okay, and then Sean, what are your final words for the nice people? Sean started it.
Sean started it.
As I said earlier, this has been a masterclass in fatalism. It's easy. It's easy to be negative. It's hard to be positive, and that's part of the issue we have with global communications these days, especially with social media, where I could be in Portugal and hear about something that happened in China minutes after it happened. And so the hardest thing to do is to take in all of that information and go, I'm going to keep living my life. If we keep allowing things to affect us emotionally, it'll be impossible for us to stay sane. So just think about that the next time somebody says something or you hear about something and you want to respond to it emotionally. Try to take a step back and think it through before you direct your emotions towards it. To others.
Good wise words wiser words were never spoken. Um, I'd like to thank both of my guests for being on and putting up with these shenanigans. I'd like to thank you all for tuning in and listening to us. This was a heavy hitting show. So so thanks. Remember to be safe out there, wash your hands, and stay tuned for the closing credits.
Thank you all for tuning in. This has been a presentation of Bald Spots Productions. I'd like to thank our producer, my beloved mother, Eileen Hatch.
I, of course, am your humble host.
I'd like to thank my special guests, Chris Walker and Sean Weisbrot.
Support the show if you feel so led over on patreon.com. We're known as Bald Spots Pro. Don't you dare miss YWL Online. You can find us on Facebook, YouTube, and wherever fine podcasts are offered.
Be sure to tune in next time when my special guest will be Steve Bates. Be sure to like, comment, and share. Subscribe, follow, whatever it is you've got to do to kick that algorithm into gear and help us reach more people.
If you or someone you know needs support now, call or text 988 or chat 988lifeline.org. That is the suicide and crisis lifeline here in the United States.